amount of damage reduction. Operators with multi-hit will have all their hits counted toward the Baja Blast charge, so for example, Exy with her S3 will instantly get the turret bar to full every time she attacks it, but Wheaty's true damage tick per second on her S3 doesn't charge them. Since operators can attack the device, this skill mostly benefits operators with any on-attack effects. You can be straightforward and go for Thorns or Chongyue skill charging, which is a really big help for them. You can also pseudo-extend the range of operators like Chen, allowing them to charge the turret so the turret can hit other enemies. But you can also be very liberal with the definition of on-attack effect. Ox dying because there's no enemies in place for him to hit? Well, now he has something to constantly hit and shouldn't die unless RNG specifically hates you in particular. Blemishine S3 has massive healing, but too bad there's no enemies in range for her to hit. Fixed. And now every operator in her range is practically invulnerable unless they're getting one shot. The way the devices work is that they're counted as enemies, and this opens an entire can of worms that I'm not ready to finish. You remember that they have -2 taunt, right? Well, Steward has a talent that makes him target the enemy with the highest defense in his range, and guess how much defense the turrets have? A whopping 2000, for no particular reason by the way, because they have 100% damage reduction anyways. So, if you place a turret in Steward's range, he will always target it, even if there are other enemies in his range. You know how Passenger S3 spawns a lightning storm on the enemy with the highest max HP in his range? Well, considering the turrets don't lose a lot of HP from firing shots, they'll be the main target of Passenger's wrath. There is an entire ass iceberg of stainless quirks, and I'm only here to get you started on the stainless S3 lapping. Just know that this skill has a lot of creativity and nuances. The something should be pulled moment. Honestly, stainless is kinda M9 worthy, but that's whale speak, so go with S3M3 first, because that's his signature skill. S1M3 is probably the last skill you should mastery if you plan on raising Warframe. Anyways, that's about it from me. Goodbye. Stainless, this is a microwave. I am not stepping into a microwave. You wanna try it, Amiya?
Your word is formaldehyde.
Can you use it in a sentence?
As you're sitting in your basement, you hit your vape, but then your mom walks in, freaks out, and starts listing the toxic chemicals you could be inhaling into your body, like formaldehyde, which she singles out because it's the same chemical used to preserve your Uncle Rico's funky-smelling taxidermied fox. Formaldehyde. Vaping can expose you to toxic chemicals like formaldehyde. No need to spell it out any more than that. Brought to you by The Real Cost and FDA.
Hey guys, what's up? This video is gonna be a little spicy. Today, I'm gonna burn you all to the ground, like from Operation Pyrite. Let's talk about DPS and showcases. You're gonna need the quarterly by next week? I'll be right on it, boss. Ugh, I hate my job. The Arknights community has grown a lot since people crying over CC Beta. Instead of just using Silver Ash and calling it a day, the gameplay side of the community now needs to quantify everything with DPS. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. I'm all for it, since numbers give you a better sense of what works and what doesn't, but with this new craving for numbers comes a lot of nuances that people often overlook. Everyone looks to DPS for the standard metric of comparing damage. Now be careful, if you're busting out these numbers raw, aka you're pulling them out without any consideration into enemy defense or arch resistance, then I will crush you with a vending machine. Metaphorically, of course. Honestly, this topic could go on forever on how to appropriately apply numbers to help strengthen your analysis, but I already explained most of it last year in this video, and this video is already actually enough, so I won't go over it again. You may wonder if high-end players actually use DPS to theorycraft, and the answer is no. If you see anyone use DPS to theorycraft, they are clinically insane and need to have an exorcism performed on them. Theorycrafting involves painstakingly figuring out the damage per hit of each operator's attack, and then multiplying it by the number of attacks in a given interval, and then using a massive-ass spreadsheet to figure out how much HP the enemy has at the end. It's not that complicated if you know the formulas, but it gets tedious fast. This process isn't necessary for most challenge clears since good players have a general idea of what is doable and what isn't, but if you're chasing records, you will need said massive-ass spreadsheets. Determining the specific damages is especially used in CC since calculating risk tags for every enemy and operator is a giant pain. So, if DPS isn't used for theory crafting, what is it actually used for? Well, DPS can give players a general idea of how an operator performs against enemy defensive stats, and is often used to compare operators against each other. There are two types of DPS people often use when comparing operators: skill DPS and average DPS. Skill DPS is exactly what it sounds like. Take all the damage during the duration of a given skill interval, divided by the uptime, and boom, skill DPS. Using skill DPS to compare operators isn't a bad idea. If you said Bagpipe S3 has higher DPS than Siege S3, therefore Bagpipe is better than Siege, you would be wrong. Bagpipe is inherently worse than Siege because Siege is the only 6-star Vanguard in the game, meaning by process of elimination, Bagpipe is only a 5-star, which is less than 6 stars. Now, hypothetically, if there were a 6-star version of Bagpipe with a 3rd skill that doubled her base attack and defense and made her hit 3 times in a single attack, basically turning her into a drill that pierces the heavens, you would be correct that her hypothetical S3 has higher DPS than Siege's S3, and that Bagpipe is better than Siege when you want damage, which is practically every scenario. What I think people struggle with the most when comparing operators using DPS is, ironically, focusing too much on the numbers. Remember, your actual goal is to prove that you should use one operator over another, so if you're gonna be busting out the numbers, you gotta put it in some usage context. Lots of people fixate on the damage, but remember that Siege has her stun, and that against high defense enemies or with attack down tags, she can actually trump hypothetical 6-star Bagpipe's Lance Nuke, though this happens very rarely. I can count the number of times on my non-existent hands, the moments when Siege actually out-DPS's Bagpipe, so even though it's possible under certain conditions, it's not really a strong point. Not only does usage context matter, but how many times that situation arises is also important. Overall, keep in mind that skills aren't often made up of pure damage, and that there are other effects like crowd control that exist. Let's move on to average DPS. Average DPS is the most useless metric, hands down, and I better not see any of you bringing it up when arguing for literally anything. Average DPS is when you take both skill DPS uptimes and downtimes into consideration. Here, give me 10 seconds. Silver Ash's first skill has 1.1k average DPS. Silver Ash's third skill has only 1k average DPS. Therefore, Silver Ash's first skill is better. While it does make for an amazing clickbait title, "You're using the wrong skill?" Everyone knows you're being disingenuous to SA. You're hurting his feelings, and he's already been through so much, and now you're laying this onto him? Do you have no shame? The reason why average DPS sucks is that there is severe contrast between duration skill DPS and basic attack DPS, so simply averaging the two gets you into a middle ground that doesn't exist. You even have worse usage context than skill DPS because special effects like debuffs or crowd controls are usually only in skills, so you can assume the effects are up with the skill DPS. For average DPS, you have a sludge of basic attacks and skill attacks, so you can't even tell if you're getting some debuffing or a regular ass auto attack. The only reason why you'd use average DPS is when you're putting power strike skills against each other, like Palace S1 versus Silver Ash S1. Other than that, it's completely useless to bring up, so don't bother. You're gonna need the weekly by tomorrow? I'll be right on it, boss. Ugh, hate my job. I'm not calling out any specific names, but some of the showcases I've seen around on YouTube are a bit concerning, to put it lightly. It's upsetting, because sometimes the operator is not quite how the uploader portrayed them, and then you read comments and see everyone go, "Wow, this is the worst operator of all time. I hate everything they stand for, and especially their mother." Though, at the same time, viewers can make some, to put it lightly again, whack-ass judgments based on what they've seen, so it's not 100% the creator's fault. There's lots of things I can name off that result in a jank showcase, but let's start with the easy ones, which is just to use less operators. Using less operators is always good, because that means the operator you're trying to showcase is actually putting in the work instead of sitting there on the sidelines like a cheerleader. Unless there's Sora. She's the only cheerleader that's allowed. Less ops also means you're not doing overblown stuff like buff army against Patriot, which at that point, it's not even a showcase. That right there is a funny, quirky gameplay meme video, and I'm not saying these shouldn't exist, but you can't point at these and say, well, if you buff Angelina with every buff in the game and then debuff the enemy with Shadow Wizard Money Gang, she pops off, bro. Like, yeah, of course, if you inject any operator with every steroid at once, they'll go off. Liskarm SP battery abusing is basically the same thing too, and since you don't get to feel the true downtime of skills, you can't feel how good or bad the skill durations are relative to it. It basically becomes a fashion show where the operator in the spotlight gets to show off how cool their skill effects are. I'm not saying all gameplay videos are showcases because sometimes it's funny to have Conviction one-punch Patriot to death with a buff army, but videos that have these things in them don't make good realistic demonstrations. Okay, so for a good showcase, you need to use less ops and avoid buff armies or some SP shenanigans, but how about not repeating the same stages over and over again? There's hundreds of stages in Arknights to showcase, excluding all the beginning chapters because those are piss easy, but for some reason I keep seeing the same ones being played over and over again. This is an issue because you aren't figuring out what the ops kit is and applying it, instead you're just slapping them down and praying they can fit the job. That about covers it on the showcaser's side, but for the viewers you also have the responsibility to take everything into account. If my Exu showcase doesn't include heavy defense enemies, it probably means she sucks against high defense enemies without external help. As much as I'm spitting all these rules down for a good showcase, I also showcase operators, and sometimes I feel the pain of a showcaser thinking this stage would be just so much easier if I added Sculptor, or wow, this op would do really well in 7.16. Oh wait, I've already done that stage for the past 3 videos. I am technically a showcase channel, whether it be new ops or mods, and I'm not immune to my own rules or biases, cause, you know, I'm human. So, am I good at my job? You're gonna need the daily by the next hour? Why the hell do you even need a daily report? You can't fire me, I quit. Okay, never mind, I don't quit. Here is Ebenholz. He is a boss killer. Supposedly, of course. I will never confirm or deny that boss killers exist in the game. Ebenholz hits pretty hard, but he's also regarded as the worst 6-star caster in the game. I pulled for him, despite knowing this, because I am a licensed sociopath. What makes him so bad? Well, let's figure that out. You want me to hire a composer to make a theme song for you? Oh, it's coming with the anime. Yeah, that makes sense. I guess I'll try contacting some artists and see what comes up. Ebenholz is a Mystic caster, which means he has an extremely long attack interval of 3 seconds, but a very high attack going up to 1,500 at max level and trust. He can store charges of his attacks where there are no enemies in range, and all these charges are unleashed on his next attack. This mechanic makes Mystic casters in general hard to use because you don't have much control over when they'll be expending these charges, which if you're not positioning the Mystic caster correctly, will usually be some random dog or slug that they'll waste all their charges on. Small enemies are the bane of Mystic caster's existence because the charge attacks are way overkill for the low HP, meaning you wasted damage and now your day sucks and you have no motivation to do anything, which reflects poorly on your resume and work ethic, so you might as well drop out of school and become a full-time content creator. Ebenholz has some conditions in his kit to avoid this wasted damage problem, which is great since you'll pretty much only want him to tackle big enemies anyways. His first talent, Dynamics, increases his damage on stored shots and lets him store an additional charge that can only be fired on elite or boss enemies. If you can't tell whether or not an enemy is a boss or an elite, they're basically signified by this triangle sign in the enemy archive. This talent ensures that Ebenholz will save at least some of his damage for big enemies, but only if you let him store his charges to max. This elite only stock will always be the last to charge, so if Ebenholz doesn't build up this charge and attacks a Payon, then he'll have to start over to try building the stock again. Overall, the increased damage on stored charges increases his front-loaded damage even more, and with the extra boss charge, you can tell which direction his kit is going in. Appoggiatura, which is Ebenholz's second talent, lets him deal more damage to the target if there are no nearby enemies in a 1.1 tile radius near his target. Both of these talents point Ebenholz's kit into handling elite enemies and bosses, since they're usually isolated, letting him scale off his second talent. His whole kit synergizes with this role, cause you're gonna be placing him in a spot where there aren't many small enemies, and he'll get that spicy big red funny number along with the extra charge in. His first and second talent scale with each other multiplicatively, which is really good for his damage. Hey man, I know you have a lot of experience composing, and I noticed that your recent works were more modern genres compared to your previous pieces. Do you think you could make an opening song for an anime? You have some ideas already. Alright, I'll leave it to you then. Ebenholz's first skill changes his attack range to an Ifrit lane minus last tile, reducing his attack interval to half a second at M3, but also reducing the damage to only 50%. This skill is very short, only lasting 5 seconds, though it also has a short SP cost of only 15. Basically, use this skill if you want to get charges fast, since the attack interval reduction will make Ebenholz get all his stocks quickly. The linear range can actually be a good thing, since he won't waste his attacks on the adjacent enemies. You wouldn't really use it over his third skill in most cases, since the attack reduction and short duration doesn't add more to his one-shot potential, but it's good for general usage. Ebenholz's second skill uses all his stored charges to summon his gang on deployable tiles. The spooky dudes last 30 seconds and basically act as W mines, exploding and dealing arts damage when enemies come near them. The explosion will also pull enemies toward the summon with medium force. You might think this skill is actually pretty decent because it's like WS2, but with a funky pull instead, which might have some fun usage, but no, it is complete doo-doo. Hot dog water. Utter garbage. You see, Ebenholz's summons only last 30 seconds, while W's mines last for 120, which is, 4 times that duration. Ebenholz will need to consistently refill the ghost guys in his range, which means he can't stack attack charges. Also, the summon count is directly tied to the amount of stored charges he has, which means if Ebenholz tries slamming them all on an enemy before the skill, you'll only get 1 ghost man out of it. This problem of not having enough goals is made even worse with the stupid pull force. Imagine this. An enemy trips and falls on their way to school and walks in the goal range where the first explosion deals just enough damage to not kill them, and they live with a sliver of health. But now they trigger all the other spook dudes with their negligible HP, and on top of that, they're in Ebenholz's range, so he spends all his charges on them, and bam, current goal gang is gone, and next goal gang is postponed until 2024. It doesn't even have to be the pull. Eben spawning multiple summons on top of a small enemy will trigger 2 or 3 of them, and that's plenty of wasted damage. The delay on the explosion also means that more summons can trigger even after one of the goals decides to commit seppuku. What's disappointing is that the damage is actually pretty good, but there's so many ways for the summons to get wasted instead of exploding at the right time. The skill is only good if you're able to let him snowball with it, but at that point, you might as well just use a different operator. Ebenholz's third skill is basically a better version of his skill 1. It increases his attack speed and attack, but only makes him able to target elite or boss enemies. It also buffs the talent 1 charge damage multiplier to 1.89 times instead of 1.35. You don't have to be a genius to see how to use this skill. You press a button and bam, fat damage against elites or bosses if you let them hit with max stored charges, which isn't enough to kill most bosses, but it's sizable enough to make anything way less menacing. The single attacks after the burst are also pretty good. Because the skill has low downtime of 20 SP and can manually be deactivated, you can also use it like his skill 1 where you press the button to get the attack speed buff so Eben can gain charges faster and then deactivate once he's at full HP to help cycle it again. You can do the funny skill attack cancel with him, just like with most other operators with projectiles, to get the big damage on non-elites. His X module gives him more stored charge damage as the talent upgrades, and an extra charge for the trade upgrade, which is pretty good. S3's first hit is even bigger now. Damage good. Ooh yeah. Ebenholz's Y mod gives him attack speed when he's holding charges and basically turns him into a pseudo AoE caster if he's attacking non-isolated enemies. The difference between these two mods is not that Y mod is for S2 and X mod is for S3. Y mod is if you're trying to magically turn your Ebenholz into a more well-rounded operator by giving him wave clear options against trash mobs. It actually pairs really well with S1 because of S1's reduced damage, so Ebenholz can spam AoE procs and kill everyone together. What a heartwarming guy. Basically, mod X for S3, mod Y for trying to actually use Ebenholz, which I assume is going to be none of you. Now, why does Ebenholz suck? He's pretty good at handling elites, so he should be really good, right? And then you realize that outside of handling elites, he's meh. And even in his niche of big damage on menacing enemy, there's infinitely better options like Shelter, Surtur, Neuralawesome, and so on. Shelter can clean up trash easy with her expanded waterboard range, but Ebenholz's attack interval is too slow to handle regular waves of mobs. His skills can't do a mix of cleaning trash and dealing big damage. S1 is the only thing close to this, but you lose a lot of damage during the uptime. S2 straight up just sucks, and S3 forces him to not attack trash, so during downtimes you can't rely on him for wave clearing. Ebenholz has massive front-loaded damage, but other than that, he's not really special. General content was not made for this man, but that's okay. I'm just gonna use him as a second Shen Awesome by buffing the hell out of his S3 and watching him do one-shot pop shots on every boss, which helps me speed from stages. He also has awesome classical music references and a really cool E2 art, so that's nice. Anyways, thanks to Locust for helping me write the script for this video. He is God's strongest Ebenholz simp, and he gave me some key details about Ebenholz that I wouldn't have known without the billion hours he put into the operator. Alright, that's it. Goodbye. Amiya, this theme is an absolute banger. Trust me on this. Hit it, Ebenholz. I was joking, please don't hurt me. Last time on Dragon Ball Z. Also, we found the Fumo first, so can we get it back? Something about tacos? Oh, she wants to try them? Wait, you've never had Cultist tacos before? You poor soul. Go ahead. Silver Ash has been the launch 6-star cornerstone that carried everyone at least once, but recently his map sweep where he Silver Ashes everywhere and says it's schwingen time has been under threat by an old horseman that does nothing but read a newspaper. This first talent is already pretty powerful, where redeploying operators is important, so stuff like contingency contract or 1P relays. 10% off cooldown doesn't sound like a lot, but it can shave an easy 6 to 7 seconds off your timings for redeployment, so yeah, it's pretty big. His